In this video, we're going to look at heat energy, or you may see it written as thermal energy. We're going to cover particle theory as a bit of a recap, then get into heat energy and how we measure heat energy in temperature. We'll then look at transfer of energy and the three ways in which heat energy can be transferred: convection, conduction, and radiation. So remembering back to particle theory, all matter is made up of vibrating particles, and the particles can move between the different states, solids, liquids, and gases, by heating up or cooling down, and that causes them to change state. So heat energy is the vibration of the particles in the matter. So all matter has the particles, and how fast they're vibrating is how much heat energy they have. So if they're vibrating very fast, they have lots of heat energy, and if they're vibrating slowly, they don't have very much heat energy. We use temperature to measure the amount of heat energy that an object has. And temperature is measured in the units of degrees Celsius. There's actually a few different ways to measure temperature, but here in Australia we use degrees Celsius. Other parts of the world use degrees Fahrenheit, and some scientists use another scale called degrees Kelvin. You can see in a thermometer that as the thermometer gets hotter, the liquid inside the thermometer rises up the tube. Now this is a good example of how heat energy works, and it fits in with the particle model. So as the liquid heats up, by putting it in your mouth or putting it in hot water, the particles in the liquid take up more space because they're vibrating faster, causing the liquid to expand, and as it expands, it takes up more room and moves up the tube of the thermometer. Thermometers these days, we use alcohol in them, a type of alcohol. They used to use mercury, but as you know, mercury is dangerous, so we no longer use that in thermometers. Transfer of energy. When energy is moved from one place to another without changing forms, we say that it's transferred. So different to converting energy or transforming energy, where you take one type of energy and turn it into another type of energy, transfer of energy is merely moving one type of energy from one place to another without changing that type of energy. So in this diagram, we've got the heat energy coming from the coals in a barbecue. That heat energy is being transferred from the coals in the barbecue up into our steaks. There are three ways in which heat energy can be transferred: convection, conduction, and radiation. It'd be a good idea for you to draw this diagram, as it's a good way to remember the difference between the three different types of heat transfer. We're now going to look at those three types of heat transfer in a bit of detail. So the first one we'll look at is convection. And convection is a form of heat transfer that occurs in liquids and gases. The reason it occurs in liquids and gases, because in liquids and gases, the particles are free to move around and roll over each other. When in a solid, they're in a fixed place. How convection works is a liquid or gas, so we'll use the example of water, is heated unevenly. So if you think of this blue cylinder as a beaker or a pot of water, and it's on the flame, as it's heated unevenly, the area being heated, so the area closest to the flame, expands because it vibrates faster, so therefore the particles need to be further apart from each other because they're vibrating so fast. As it expands, it becomes less dense because you've got less particles in the same amount of area, and this causes the less dense water to rise to the top. As the less dense water, or the hot water, rises to the top, cooler water, because it's more dense, moves in to its place, and this is a continuous cycle. So that cool water will then be heated, it will expand, and rise to the top, and cooler water will come into its place. So eventually the whole liquid or gas that you have will be the same temperature as it moves around. And we call this movement of the liquid or gas a convection current. Another way that heat transfer occurs is conduction. Conduction occurs in solids because, unlike liquids and gases, the solids are in a fixed position and they're not able to move around freely. Again, the object is heated unevenly, and so the particles that are in contact with the heat start vibrating more rapidly or vigorously and faster. As these particles vibrate faster and faster, they start to bump the particles next to them, causing those particles to vibrate a bit faster as well. Eventually, all the particles will be vibrating. And this is the chain reaction. So one particle bumps the one next to it, it bumps the one next to it, it bumps the one next to it, and eventually all of them are vibrating very fast and have a lot of heat energy. And this causes transfer along the material. Different solids have different amounts of conduction. Metal is very good at conducting heat, which is why we use metal for things like saucepans, while plastics and rubbers aren't very good at conducting heat, and that's why we use plastics and rubbers for things like saucepan handles, because we don't want the heat to go from the saucepan into our hand and burn us. The third type of heat transfer that we're going to look at is radiation. Now, radiation doesn't need a medium to travel through. That is that unlike the other two, where conduction the third type of heat transfer we're going to look at is radiation. Now, radiation doesn't need a medium to travel through. So where convection used the medium of a liquid or a gas, and conduction traveled through a solid, radiation doesn't need anything to travel through, which means that it can travel through a vacuum, somewhere where there is no matter between two places. How this works is the vibrating particles in whatever's got the heat energy creates waves, and those are infrared waves, and they can travel through space or through a vacuum. And they travel through space and hit an object at the other end eventually and heat that object. And this is how heat from the sun reaches Earth. This is how heat from the sun reaches Earth, because only through radiation is heat able to travel through the vacuum in space where there isn't anything in between it. So we get all our heat from the sun through radiation. In this video, we've looked at heat energy or thermal energy. We've looked at a bit of a recap on particle theory. We've looked at what heat energy is, which is the vibration of the particles within matter. We've looked at temperature, which is a measure of heat energy, and we measure it in degrees Celsius. We've looked at what heat transfer is, so moving energy from one place to another without changing forms. And we've looked at the three ways in which heat energy is transferred: convection, conduction, and radiation.